A mega project is a loud and memorable term, and when you hear it, the first countries that likely come to mind are China, Saudi Arabia, or the United States. However, for Central Asian states since 2022, there's only been one country linked to such a project, Afghanistan. Even though it's been over 70 years, this project is still one of the most problematic irrigation projects in modern Central Asia. The canal was meant to divert water from the Amu Darya River and irrigate the dry Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan, but its construction led to long-term environmental and economic consequences, including a sharp drop in the Amu Darya's flow into the Aral Sea. That, in turn, caused one of the world's most notorious environmental disasters. In the end, the canal takes about 45% of the water from the Amu Darya, and that's what's killing the Aral Sea. But it's not like all that water gets used. About a quarter of the water flowing into the canal gets lost in the bed itself due to filtration through the earth. Another issue with the canal is silt buildup. A small amount of silt clogs the bed's pores, and when there's too much, the water level starts rising, causing the bed to break apart. The reservoirs are also getting silted up, which reduces their useful volume. Although the Karakum Canal brings many benefits to people, you can't deny that it's also a problem at the same time. But you know what? Maybe not too far from it, they're building another problem like this. Just a bit of coffee, and we'll get started. Just a little reminder to do something under the video if that's something you usually do. So, the Kosh Tepe Canal, ever heard of it? It's an irrigation canal that's currently being built in northern Afghanistan. Once it's finished, Kosh Tepe will start pumping water from the Amu Darya River to irrigate 3 northern Afghan provinces. When the canal is fully operational, it'll stretch 177 miles, be about 330 feet wide, and up to 28 feet deep. The authorities claim that the project will lead to a green revolution, boosting job creation on a large scale and bringing economic stability to Afghanistan, something the international community would generally welcome. Everything sounds pretty good, but Kosh Tepe is causing more concern than confidence among Afghanistan's neighbors. And it's no coincidence. Experts predict the canal will divert about 20% of the water from the river that forms the border between Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. This water will be used for irrigating 1.36 million acres of currently dry farmland, which is pretty good in itself. Once the Kosh Tepe channel is launched, Afghanistan will be able to get an extra 1 to 1.2 trillion gallons of water annually, a significant increase compared to what the country has now. As part of the initial agreement with the former Soviet Union, Afghanistan was granted an annual 2.3 trillion gallons from the Amu Darya. This agreement is still in effect today, at least in theory. In practice, the country couldn't even use a third of the volume allocated to it. By the end of the 1980s, the most Afghanistan could get was 554 billion gallons. By 1987, when the Soviet Union divided the river's flow of 16 trillion gallons among the republics of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, no one bothered asking Afghanistan, which was at war with the USSR. It was simply left out of the water-sharing agreements made during the Soviet era. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the newly independent countries of Central Asia signed the Almaty Agreement in 1992, which continued to follow the framework set earlier. Once again, Afghanistan was excluded from this agreement. This exclusion means that there are no legal restrictions on the country's use of the waters of the Amu Darya. When canal construction began in 2022, Afghanistan was still not part of any regional or international agreement on the use of transboundary river waters. That is, there were no pre-agreed procedures for resolving disputes over issues affecting other countries in the river basin. The Afghan government simply stated that Afghanistan has the same right to use the waters of the Amu Darya River as its neighbors and that some agreements don't matter. On one hand, it seems fair. But on the other hand, from a legal point of view, it turns out that Afghanistan is stealing water, literally. And keep in mind that the participants in the agreement are also fighting for this resource. In September 2023, speaking at a regional meeting on the Aral Sea, the president of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, said that the problem of water shortage in Central Asia has become acute and irreversible, and will only worsen in the future. Guess why? Naturally, it's all about climate change. Climate change is already affecting Central Asia and having a serious impact. The region has seen record temperatures over the last 3 summers. Plus, rainfall has decreased, and glaciers in the eastern mountains are starting to melt. Unfortunately, Afghanistan remains in the most difficult and vulnerable position in the region. And I'm not even talking about the political, economic, or social situation right now. According to some reports, over the last 70 years, the average temperature in Afghanistan has risen by 3.2 degrees Fahrenheit, twice the global average. This is a very alarming warning sign. The people of Afghanistan, already suffering from years of war and internal conflicts, are also facing a terrible humanitarian crisis and a shortage of water. The country's water supply system has long been broken due to prolonged and frequent conflicts, and everything else has started to fall apart too. For example, in the 1970s, 8.6 million acres of land were being cultivated in Afghanistan, but now that number has dropped to 3.7 million acres. The development of wastelands and the irrigation system is crucial for Afghanistan. In its recent report on Afghanistan, the United Nations Development Programme noted that around 79% of the population doesn't have enough access to water, and 67% of households are facing difficulties related to drought. To tackle such a serious crisis, the current authorities in Afghanistan have announced the launch of about 300 projects aimed at managing water resources in various provinces. The Kosh-Tepa Canal, first proposed back in the early 1970s, is one of the major projects. Besides the obvious benefit of having water, it's expected that industries linked to the canal will be able to employ over 250,000 people. Improvements in agriculture and employment will have an impact on a number of social issues, many of which are caused by extreme poverty. It's hard to live well when you simply don't have something as essential as water. It's no surprise that Afghanistan is ranked 7th on the list of countries most vulnerable to climate change. People are already struggling with droughts, floods, and other natural disasters, and forecasts say it's only going to get worse. It might seem like sharing water in such a situation is the right thing to do, but the canal still worries Afghanistan's neighbors. The Amu Darya itself is the largest and most water-rich river in Central Asia. It's 1,578 miles long, with a basin area of 119,000 square miles. The Amu Darya Basin irrigates 5.7 million acres of land in Uzbekistan, 4.2 million acres in Turkmenistan, 1.2 million acres in Tajikistan, and 250,000 acres in Kyrgyzstan. In total, 80% of all the water resources in Central Asia come from the river. No wonder the Amu Darya is so important. The Amu Darya Basin irrigates 5.7 million acres of land in Uzbekistan, 4.2 million acres in Turkmenistan, 1.2 million acres in Tajikistan, and 250,000 acres in Kyrgyzstan. In total, 80% of all the water resources in Central Asia come from the river. No wonder the Amu Darya is so important. However, the completion of the Kosh-Tepa Canal could radically change the water situation and balance in Central Asia, especially if construction continues the way it's going now, without a collective effort to study its aspects and the channel's impact on, well, probably everyone around. People are especially worried in countries downstream of the river, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. The opening of the canal could negatively affect Uzbekistan's cotton industry, which relies heavily on water. Beans GDP by 7% by 2030. I mean, a decrease is unpleasant, but it's small, it's something you can work with. The thing is, at this stage, agricultural water use won't be significant, not because the Afghan authorities are looking out for their neighbors, but simply because the canals meant to carry water to the fields haven't been built yet. Plus, the fields aren't prepared for cultivation, so there's no point in watering them. In general, all these processes are pretty slow. So, the neighboring countries that will be affected by the canal construction have time to prepare. They can work out solutions, make agreements, and do their best to soften the consequences. Since the effects will touch not only people and farming, environmental scientists are also concerned that, in addition to irrigation problems, the construction of a new large-scale canal in the region could harm local plants and animals and affect the natural ecosystems of the Amu Darya River basin. This is the inevitable impact on any water body where large amounts of water are taken, and the only question is how bad the consequences could be. So, ecologists are sure, if the water level in the new Amu Darya drops to a critical point, it will affect the humidity in this dry region. You'd think, how could the humidity possibly get any lower? It makes sense that as the air humidity decreases, its dryness increases, and this has a really bad impact on plants. As a result, plants will die, their roots won't be able to hold the soil, and this will lead to desertification, even worse than now. As desertification gets worse, various chemical elements in the dust carried by the wind will negatively affect human health, not to mention animals. And then there's the Aral Sea, which is already in very bad shape. So, it turns out that the Kosh-Tepe Canal poses an environmental hazard, especially since many are questioning the quality of construction, and these questions only fuel the concern. It's only getting worse with satellite images showing that, in November 2023, a huge amount of water leaked from what was supposedly a finished section of the canal. No one knows for sure why it happened. There are many theories. It could be an accident, it could be a case of engineering incompetence, or even sabotage. But there's not enough evidence for the global community to draw any final conclusion, so people are left guessing. And this, honestly, is concerning. The experts probably only know that there was a breach in a section of the canal about 98 feet long, which led to significant water loss. This water kept flowing out for over a month before the International Environmental Oversight Group, Rivers Without Boundaries, raised the alarm. Based on satellite images, the group explained the flood as being caused by structural flaws in the canal's design. In other words, it was just poorly built. The canal walls apparently couldn't withstand the pressure of the flow, and a huge amount of water broke free, flooding the surrounding area. The flood was quite substantial. On November 5, the flooded area covered 7.5 square miles, but by December 13, the Uzbek state agency reported that 11.7 square miles had been submerged. But what about the Afghan authorities' statement? Well, the Taliban said it was a controlled event necessary to regulate the groundwater levels in the area of the 46-mile mark of the canal. Many independent experts were skeptical of such an explanation, but the Taliban didn't provide any other one. And as you can imagine, this does nothing to ease the anxiety. The Central Asian Bureau for Analytical Reporting released an assessment in which it raised serious doubts about the quality of the construction. The methods being used seem surprisingly primitive. It was just digging, with no proper reinforcement or cladding of the bottom and banks of the canal. The report says this approach poses a serious risk, as significant water loss could occur due to seepage into the dry, sandy soil. You get it, right? When building any canal, it's absolutely crucial to reinforce it with concrete, that's just how canals work. But Kosh-Tepe is being built without any concrete. As a result, the water sinks into the ground, wasted for no reason, and all this in the midst of a major shortage. Independent experts and engineers have repeatedly expressed their skepticism and concern about the project. They all agree that the Afghan government lacks the knowledge and experience to effectively complete the canal. Well, the parallels between the techniques and the rapid pace of constructing the Kosh-Tepe Canal and the irrigation projects of the Soviet period, particularly the Karakum Canal, just suggest we're heading down the same path of past errors. What do the Taliban themselves think about all these concerns? Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs Sher Mohammad Abbas Staniksai said this: "If our neighbors have worries in this regard, we're ready to contact them through diplomatic channels." However, while this sounded conciliatory, the statement was heard as a challenge, especially since Acting Minister of Defense Mullah Muhammad Yaqub Mujahid stated that the Afghan armed forces would firmly resist any aggressive attempts to hinder the project. But honestly, who would even try that? The thing is, Afghanistan still hasn't joined any regional or international agreements on the use of transboundary river water. Some analysts are worried that the Taliban might use the Kosh-Tepa Canal as a weapon against their neighbors. At the same time, other experts in Central Asia believe that Afghanistan has every right to take its share of water from the Amu Darya River, and will do so. After all, people really need water, and the construction of the canal is moving along pretty fast. The idea, as I mentioned before, came up a while ago, but work kicked off on March 31, 2022. The first phase of this three-phase project wrapped up in September 2023. It's been estimated at about $100 million, not an exact figure since Afghan officials aren't exactly big on providing detailed reports. But they insist the funding comes from taxes, coal mines, and other local sources. Is this funding voluntary or kind of mandatory? No one really knows. One way or another, the second phase of the project kicked off in late February 2024, and the Kosh-Tepa Canal is set to be fully completed by 2028. And that might just happen, because as of December 2024, it was announced that the second phase was 81% complete. At the time this video was made, that was the latest update, no new info has come in yet. It's also known that work is currently underway on 4 canal bridges, and thousands of jobs have been created. The canal embankments, and yes, they actually exist, surprisingly, even without concrete, are 67% done. All work is being carried out in line with global standards, said a representative of the National Development Company. How will it all end? Well, we'll find out soon, just 3 years to go.